Okay, so what we're gonna do next is basically we're going to have to go in and override the default express error handling, and we need to go in and augment all of the handlers that we wrote so far that do asynchronous things. I'm talking about the sign in, the sign up, the product, all the stuff we just did, all the stuff that you did. And we're gonna have to handle those asynchronous errors so that they can bubble up to our error handling. Otherwise, our service is gonna crash every time someone does something silly, all right? Or every time a timeout happens or anything. So that's what we'll do. You can start on that now if you want to. When we come back, we'll do it together. I hope everyone had some time to handle your errors. And if not, we'll do it together. So let's hop right into it. First thing is I want to create the error handler that's going to handle the errors to do something, I don't know, a little more customized than just sending out an error message. So what I want to do for my error handler is I want to send back a different status code or different message depending on what type the error might be. And I can change the error type. It's just an object. I can do whatever I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just have, I don't know, 3 different types of errors. So I can say if error.type equals off, I can say res.json, or I can say res.status 401. And I don't actually have to do another res.json. I can actually chain this. I just don't like doing it, but you can just do JSON like this. It chains. And I can just send back a message saying, you know, unauthorized if I want to. So if error.type is auth, it's that. Else if error.type is input. So if you send back some wrong input or something like that, I can say res.status is 400, which is a BAT request. And I can send back a message, JSON, and I can say like invalid input. And then I can say else just default to, it's basically our fault. It's a 500. I'm just gonna say res.status 500, JSON message, oops, that's on us. And then now I need to handle some errors. So let's do that. I'm just gonna go into the user one. We did that one. And how do you catch an asynchronous error?
In the catch?
In the catch of,
a try catch?
A try catch, yeah. You can try catch it. You can try catch something asynchronous. But here's where it starts to get tricky when you start try catching everything. One is scoping. So variables created in a try are not accessible outside of the try. So then you got to start like hoisting your variables and or just doing every single thing in the try catch like that. That's one option. The problem with that is if you have 2 asynchronous things happening inside this one try catch, how do you know, and then let's say the catch triggers, how do you know which one of those errored out? So you need 2 separate try catches to handle 2 separate errors so you can determine which error type was what, so you can respond differently. So it just basically just gets really bloated with try catches everywhere when you want to do something like handling errors asynchronously. There is a way around this. There's a little function. Maybe I'll show it later. I don't want to show it now, but you can get around using try catch everywhere with async await. You can use destructuring actually and do some pretty cool stuff. But for now, we're just going to try catch everything. Just put everything in here unless it's more than one, and then we can talk about what that will look like. So if there is an error, then I'm just calling next. I'm just going to say next error. But before I call it, I'm going to say error.type I could just add a type here. And if this broke, if create user broke, assuming the database connection didn't mess up or whatever, I'm just gonna blame the user, and I'm gonna say this was a bad input. Like you sent up a username that was already taken, so that's what I'm guessing. But in reality, you would probably want to inspect this error right here to see that it was indeed that error from the database, because Prisma will throw an error that has an error code and an error message. You can look at that to determine if it was indeed someone using the same username, or was it because the connection to the database failed and it should be a 500 and not the user's fault. You can get very specific with it. If your product is an API, you probably are very cautious about those errors. If your product isn't an API, it's probably not that big of a deal that you know exactly what error did what, because it's your API for your product. You just need to make sure your server doesn't crash, and you can investigate the errors later. Just put just enough information that you need, and you don't need all the detail. But for an API that's a product, yeah, you would want to make sure you have the exact errors, a link to the documentation that talks about this error status and what it does, and things like that. GitHub and Stripe does a really good job on that. Error handling is a big deal. There's like people dedicated on a team whose job is just to do error handling. It's like that big of a deal. Okay, so let's check this out. So I say I'm going to create a new user, type input if it's broken. So let's try that. So one, that means we got to get past the input validation that's already put in place. Or did we even add input validation to a user? I don't think we did, which is fine. Where is that at? That's an index. No, that's in server. There we go. Yeah, we don't have input validation. But even if we did, I can still get past it. I can still have a username. I can still have a password. And this could still fail because the username was already taken, right? Because the input validation isn't going to check the database to see if there's a user with that username already in there. I guess you could have it do that, but why when a database is going to do it for you automatically? Because of the unique constraint on your schema. There's no point of creating the database ahead of time. What's the point of having a unique constraint? So let's try to create two users with the same thing and see what happens. Okay, so if I say posts to user with a body of username Rick and password of cheese. So if I do that, I get a new user. Cool, that should work. If I do it again, I get our 400 BAT request, message invalid input, right? And that's exactly what I had in our error handler. If we go back and look at that. Here, so it triggered this, input type, error type of input, 400 invalid input. And that's because that's what I did here. I said, oh, if this throws an error, its type is input, and call next. So that's what happened. So our error handler works. Our little errors type system works. This can get more sophisticated. Like there's nothing stopping you from creating custom errors that extends the error class, right? Like you could do that. And then you can just have you can check for those custom errors inside your error handler. In fact, there's packages that already have some of these. If you ever use GraphQL, Apollo's built in with a lot of this stuff. That's just the next level, but maybe it's worth it. Okay, let's do one more. Let's go to a little more advanced one. How about one for product? So for product, yeah, so let's find one that has input validations. Okay, so for update product, or actually let's do create product. So for create product, this will never run unless the input validation passes. So in what scenario would this this database query calls an error. If this database query did throw an error, why would it?
If we increase the name length.
If we increase the name length. Oh yeah, did we actually add that constraint? I don't remember. Yeah, I think you might be right. I actually was not thinking of that. That's really good. Oh yeah, you're right. If it's more than 255, yeah, yep. So yeah, I guess it could still fail input because we're not checking for 255 on our input middleware. Although we could go to Express Validator and like max length 255, and then if that was the case, then why would this fail if we did have that? Assuming we had that, why would this fail?
If it doesn't belong to the user?
If it doesn't belong to the user, exactly. If it doesn't belong to the user, it should fail. That's exactly right. And the other one is, which is true for any database query, is that like the database just might have messed up, might have lost a connection, or something happened, somebody pulled the plug. Like there's usually, talking over HTTP or any protocol over the internet is always going to be finicky. So it's not always going to be, talk to the database, everything came back. Like you might just have a connection problem, which is a server problem. So it could be that too. So we want to handle those. So let's do that. So we'll go back into product and let's do just that. So right now, well, I guess for create product, it doesn't matter if it doesn't belong to the user because you're creating it. So yeah, I guess maybe not for that. On read, if I was getting a product, then yeah, it would throw an error. But for create, yeah, because I'm only putting in the rec.user. So yeah, that shouldn't be an error. The only really error here for this one would be if the database messed up. So in this case, there is no scenario in which the user could have messed this up, assuming we had the 255 limit check on the input middleware. So in that case, I would do a try catch, and this would be a type of like, this would just be like a 500 because we messed up. If this thing broke, it's probably because we messed up, because how else would you have messed this up? So I'll just do that. Try catch. And then because by default, all errors default to 500, I don't have to give it a type, so I can just say next. I don't know why it keeps doing that. Next tick. And then we just need to bring in next. And really, that's just like how you have to play it. You have to go like scenario by scenario and think about why might this throw an error and try to catch that error, figure out what that error type would be, and then report it, collect it, log it appropriately. So it could be very tedious. And creating an error system is tough. It's usually a lot easier to do before you start writing the code. After you write the code and you got to go back and augment it with like an error handling solution, in my opinion, it's a lot tougher. But it is case by case basis. And this isn't even including transactions, right? A transaction is like, let's say inside of create product, not only do we create a product in a database, but we go talk to this other API like Stripe and we create something there. And then we update something else in the database when Stripe comes back. We do all these multiple operations. But let's say halfway through, one of the 5 operations we do, number 4 failed, right? We probably want to roll back and undo all the other things that we did so the database isn't in a wonky state of halfway, did some of this stuff but didn't do this stuff, because you probably don't have the ability to resume where you left off. So you need a transaction to roll that back. When you start doing transactions, you absolutely need to know which error happened, because some errors are going to require you to roll back and some won't. So it's imperative to know what threw and why it threw. So thinking about that is a really good exercise. Okay, so try to create a product. Yeah, we'll get a 500. So let's try to create a product. Go here, or here. We're gonna post to API product with a name. Of, whatever. it's probably not going to break because the database, well, it might break for some other reason, but it shouldn't break because the database is fine. It's not broken. I said the only scenario in which this might break was because the database didn't connect. But we do have that character limit, so I guess we could test that just to see. So I'm gonna just run into that limit right quick. I think that's 255. That has to be 255. I can't tell. Let's see. Yeah, okay, there we go. So we hit the limit. And right now, this threw the error on create, but our database actually shut down. I'm sorry, our server actually shut down. So it looks like, let's see why that might have been. That should have been caught here. So let's see. Product, try product. Why would this not have been caught? The only reason I could think this wasn't caught is because this handler belongs to a sub-router and our error handler is on the main router stack, and that might be a reason. We can try it. Let's see what happens. So let's go to router and let's add an error handler here on the router. So we can say router.use, we can add an error handler here, and let's see what happens. That's my hypothesis, I guess. Let's see what happens. And router handler. Let's see. Run that again. Run that again. Yeah, that's exactly right. So because we're in a because the handlers for all the resources that aren't user are in the sub router, their errors aren't going to bubble up to the main router's error handling. So if you have a sub router, you also have to add an error handler for that router at the bottom of those routes as well. I forgot about that little gotcha. Cool. Any other questions on error handling? Most of the stuff is mostly just the same. I would say the only thing that's probably slightly different would be the updates, where there might be more than one query. So you have to do multiple try catches, but still the same. You just gotta think about why would this break and what type of error would it be? Would it be caused by a user doing something? Hopefully our input validators eliminated most of what a user could do to cause our stuff to break, as far as like values and values existing or not existing and types of values. Or is it, outside of our control? There's some logic in here that hits a third-party API. We're talking to the Pokemon API and that broke, and that's why our thing broke. Or is it a technical issue? The database connection string broke, or we dropped the connection, right? You gotta think about like what and why would something break, and then plan for that. Try catch that, inspect the error, see what it is, and then handle it appropriately.